Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Gloucester County Amateur Radio Club's Technical Forum at our Hamfest in 2024. Our first presentation this morning is going to be from John Zaruba, K2ZA. His former calls are WB2VOH, DA1ZJ, and AA2BN. Now, John, his ham radio interests are CW, QRP, home brewing, operating satellites, and what you're going to hear this morning is Parks on the Air. So John's going to give us a great overview of the his work in Parks on the Air, gives us some hints and create some opportunities for all of us to get on and do this very interesting activity in subset of the ham radio hobby. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to John.
All right, thanks for the intro, Stan. I appreciate that. Okay, so activating parks on the air with an emphasis on the antennas. Okay.
CW guys.
Yeah, I know. Where do I plug the paddle in? Okay, first off, I wanted to, I always dedicate this presentation to a former club member, Joe Everhart, N2CX, former engineer with RCA and L3. The guy had forgotten more about RF and antennas than I'd ever learned, and he was the guy that got me started, so, and he was a real inspiration. A couple of his special activations were, and I don't think too many people have done this, he activated Ellis Island, and he also activated the Betsy Ross House. The Betsy Ross House he did with a mag loop sitting on the front porch of the building. So aren't too many people have done that. So they were definitely some of the more interesting activations. But yeah, it was a real inspiration for me. So at this point, I'm sure everybody has a pretty good idea what Parks on the Air is, but it grew out of an operating activity that the ARRL started in 2016. That was National Parks on the Air, and the program was a one-time, one-year operation, but it became such a hit with the ham community that a bunch of operators after stepped up and created the Parks on the Air program and expanded it not just to national parks, but also to state parks, wildlife management areas, recreational trails. In fact, it's easier to say what Parks on the Air excludes, which is not much, but it's municipal parks are basically the only thing. And I think they didn't do the municipal parks simply because getting all those entities in the database, you're talking about thousands of parks. So it was a little bit of a heavy lift. So hopefully at some point in the future they'll revisit that and maybe expand it. Okay, so there's what I like to call 2.5 types of operation. You got the folks that are going out and activating the park, but without them, it's just on the air calling CQ. You need hunters. So the hunters are the folks who are out there making the activation happen. They're the folks that are lining up to work somebody, that are pulling minuscule signals out of the ether to try and make a contact. So the two, you got to have activators, but you got to have hunters to make the activators' time worthwhile. The half part of this operation is a lot of activators. If their activation slows down, if you call CQ, 4 or 5 times, you haven't gotten any takers, you pause and you scan up and down the band, you look for other park activators, and that's called park-to-park hunting. The nice part about park-to-park hunting is you wind up in the POTA point scheme, you wind up getting double points because you get points as a hunter and as an activator. So when you're going to go out and do an activation, first thing you got to ask yourself is, what kind of activation am I going to do? Because they're very different, whether you're operating from a pavilion and a picnic table, you're going to drive your car out someplace and just activate from a parking lot. And I'll get into that one a little bit later because that's a really viable strategy for certain situations that can make the difference between doing an activation and not doing one. And then there's the classic, backpack and hike into some operating area. Okay, what mode do you want to use? Do you want to work single sideband? Do you want to work one of the data modes? FT8's very popular. Or do you want to work my favorite, CW? That question, the reason you want to answer that question first is because the answer to that question, what mode, feeds into the question of what power level. Single sideband, you're going to need to run a little more power than you would if you're running one of the data modes or you're running CW. So now we talk about antenna choices. If you're operating from the car, you got a lot of flexibility. I've got, on the back of my truck, I've got a stake mount for a ham stick. So if I want to just roll into a place, I maybe have an hour to activate, stick a ham stick on the back of the truck. I already have the radio in there. Boom, I just get on and start calling CQ POTA. A lot of hams have screwdriver antennas. They work great too. Trailer hitch mounts. Before I had the pickup truck, I had a Jeep, and I used a fiberglass mast, and then a plate that I would park the Jeep wheel on that has a tube mounted on it to stick the mast in, and that mast isn't going anywhere. The advantage to doing that is now you don't have to worry about guying your mast. The truck's or the stand's going to do it for you. Okay, this is really great for nasty weather, and if you're here again, harkening back to Joe, Joe would go out in any weather, any time of year. He literally activated almost every weekend of the year because he couldn't operate from home. The RFI, he had high voltage lines going through his backyard, so the RFI was just absolutely miserable at his house. So that's the only way he got on the air, was doing parks on the air activation. So any time of year, any kind of weather, Joe was out there. So I learned a lot of this from his operations. So yeah, nasty weather, it's raining out. Hey, nobody wants to sit in the rain. You can sit in a nice warm car with a nice cup of coffee and just have a great time. Okay, picnic table type operation. All right. Now we're a little more constrained, not a whole lot, but you have to take advantage of structures and things that are around you, picnic tables, that type of thing. So I tend to favor in this situation ground-mounted vertical because they're very small footprint type of antennas. The camera can't see it, but I've got a buddy stick vertical here. It's a really nice commercial antenna. It's a tad on the expensive side, but it performs well for what it is. But you also get the side benefit of it's an antenna erector set, so you can play around at home with an antenna and an analyzer and figure out a lot how antennas work. So there's verticals like that. There's wire antennas, like this guy right here. This is an end-fed wire. The nice part is packs up really small. So if you're backpacking, you got a lot of gear. This is very handy. I keep this literally in the console of my truck, so it doesn't take up any space. The nice part about the end-fed half wave is you have the option. You can deploy it horizontally, you can deploy it vertically, inverted Vs, inverted Ls. You got a lot of flexibility in how you deploy this antenna. And then there's mag loops. I've got one mag loop. It's not the greatest, and consequently, my experience with mag loops has not been awesome. But there have been times where it's gotten the job done because nothing else would. So there's trade-offs with all these antennas. The mag loop seems to have the largest number of trade-offs. Okay, picnic table or pavilion. Now you get, here again, you've got a lot of options for antenna deployment, equipment deployment. The biggest thing though you have to watch is not only are we out there representing amateur radio, we also need to keep in mind public safety. People can, trip on a ground wire, get an RF burn if they grab an antenna, an unshielded antenna. So you got to keep these things in mind because if you have a bad activation, you could potentially get amateur radio banned from operating in that park. So you got to keep in mind that your successful operation is paving the way for the next operation, making it easier for the next person. So a lot of state parks are sensitive about antennas in trees, so you need to check that out. The New Jersey state parks, especially in certain parks, really will get upset if you've got wires in trees. The state forests, not so much. So you've got to keep that in mind. If in doubt, call the park office and find out what their policies are. Generally, National Park Service facilities are the most tightly regulated. They don't want wires in trees. They also don't want stakes in the ground because of potential for cross-contaminating. You can pick up plant diseases unless you sterilize your equipment after you've deployed somewhere. You could potentially pick up a pathogen on, a plant pathogen on a stake, and then you go to an environmentally sensitive site, you pound that stake in the ground, and now you've exposed, potentially introduced a foreign pathogen and, created a disease problem. So National Park Service, they're pretty strict about that. So that's one of the things where this buddy pole is like buddy stick. This is my National Park Service site configuration because as it's sitting right here, I'm sitting on a concrete pad. There's no ground penetrations. So the only thing you got to be careful of is the counterpoise wire. You have to make sure that you've throw some surveyor's tape, anything to make that counterpoise more visible so people don't trip on it. But for a place where you've got limitations as far as throwing wires in trees or putting stakes in the ground, that's a really, really good alternative. Now, not to say you need to go out and buy a buddy stick. There are plenty of plans on the internet. In fact, if you look back in the New Jersey QRP Club archives from the late 90s, there's an antenna called the PAC-10 that you can build with PVC hardware and basically all materials you can get from Home Depot. So you don't have to go buy a commercial antenna. You definitely have opportunities to build. Okay, hike in. And anybody who's done any type of hiking or backpacking understands rule number one: you're carrying it, you got to keep it light. This is primarily the place where I do this type of operation is Wharton State Forest. There's a trail that goes from Bass River up to the Brennan Burns State Forest called the Batona Trail. It's about 60 miles long. And there's so many neat places to go just out in the middle of the woods to set up and do an operation. And it is so RF quiet there. You turn on the radio and you have to double check to make sure you turn the radio on because the background noise is like non-existent. So if you're wondering why somebody in their right mind would put all this stuff in a bag and toss it on their back and go walk into the woods, that's why. RF quiet, it's awesome. It's why the Wharton Tract is my favorite place to operate. So, again, make sure it's lightweight stuff. Soda Beam's Carbon 6 is basically a rebranded Chinese carbon fiber fishing pole with no eyelets or anything. It's just a blank pole, but they're really small. and they're super, super light. So that's a good alternative for, helping support a wire type antenna in that scenario. Make sure you're a good steward of the outdoors. Pack out your trash. If you show up on a site and there's trash already there, hey, consider taking it out with you. Leave the place a little better than when you found it. Also, pack a trowel, and so if you have that urgent call of nature, you can hide the evidence. Okay, more decisions in the decision tree. What band or bands are you going to operate? How's the propagation? Are we, has the sunspot numbers been down? Magnetic storms, bands noisy? Kind of start thinking about this stuff a few days before your deployment. Start, taking a look at propagation conditions to try and get an idea of, helping inform this decision. If the bands are open and we've got a good band opening and you're picking a higher band, let's say 15 meters, 12 meters, 10 meters, potentially you could skip over a lot of people, especially in the Northeast. In fact, I was talking to another POTA operator who she activates down south. If you happen to see her on YouTube or on K2ZA's QRP site, she goes by the handle of POTA Babe, and she does a lot of parks on the air activation down south. And she's constantly, oh, you guys in the Northeast, you have it so easy. Everybody's all packed together. Well, if you start going to the higher bands on a band opening, all of a sudden all those close-in contacts are going to disappear. Now, it's fun to work DX, and a lot of the European operators, if they can hear an American station doing a parks operation, you'll get a pileup because it's not an everyday occurrence. So you get a lot of hunters that are really interested in hunting you, and when that happens, all of a sudden the propagation signal levels, all that stuff doesn't seem to make as much of a difference because everybody wants that contact. So 80, 40, 30, those, at least for me, those are my money bands. Those are where I'm going to start. Being a CW operator, I generally start on 30. If the bands are long and it's propagation's looking good, I'll jump up to 20 to try and work out to the West Coast. When bands aren't so hot, 40 meters is the money band because you'll get really good regional propagation, and like my friend Terry, she's always complaining about the density of Northeast operators. It's almost impossible to not have a good, not have a successful operation if you're working on 40 meters. 80 is good if there's a smaller subset of people that do nighttime activations. 80 is great for that, but the antennas generally are a little, if you got something that's easily deployable, it's not going to be as efficient, so your signal's going to be down. If you want something that radiates well, you've got a lot of wire to put up in the air. Generally, verticals have a lower angle of radiation, tend to be more of a DX-oriented antenna, especially if you're doing a parks on the air activation. I was just talking with K2FOX here about activating in Corson's Inlet State Park down at the Jersey Shore, where you can basically stick your antenna almost in the water and throw the ground wire in the salt water, and oh baby, you've got the saltwater amplifier working for you, and that can really enhance your signal and make a really fun activation. Just don't go down there when the greenheads are out, right. Which is 10 months out of the year, Jay. All right, so you got to kind of figure out who your customers are. You're trying to work local and just generate a lot of contacts. You're trying to work some DX. There's pluses and minuses to both type of activation. All right, mag loop, and like I said, this is the antenna that has the most trade-offs. It's very small, portable, very high Q though. So it's and if you're not familiar with the term high Q, it means the antenna has a very narrow tuning range. Almost all the mag loops have some sort of tuning interface at the bottom, whether it's a manual knob or a remote. And you tune it up, you get it down, get the SWR nice and low on one particular frequency. And if you're on, let's say, 40 meters and you move 10 kilohertz, all of a sudden your SWR is through the roof. You got to retune again. So they're not as frequency agile as some of the other antennas, but makes up for it in compact size. Plus, you get the bonus of loops are very directional. So you can actually, if you've got interference, I had this happen once when I was down at Belle Plaine. There was the only street light for like 10 miles, and it had a noisy ballast. And the light was flickering on and off, and every time it happened, it would just destroy the HF. Well, with the mag loop, I was able to turn the loop and null out that offending ballast. Didn't make it completely go away, but it knocked it down about 30 dB, so it made the difference between being able to operate and not operate. It's also a good antenna for National Park Service sites because no ground penetrations, nothing hanging up in trees. Also, one-to-one choke at the feed point will help eliminate a lot of stray RF getting back into your radio. I generally recommend a one-to-one choke balun in every antenna configuration. It's just whatever antenna you're using will inform where you put it, whether you want it at the feed point of the antenna or you want it at the radio. Okay, loaded coil verticals. Anything in the buddy stick, Wolf River coil, super antennas. There's a bunch of them. All variations on a theme. Usually the variation is how you tune it. Buddy stick has these little clips that you put taps on a coil. Wolf River coils actually has a sliding mechanism to adjust the tuning. So you've got choices, and whatever makes whatever makes the operation easier for you out in the field. The buddy stick uses the single elevated radial design. Wolf River coils seem to work better with multiple ground radials. So there's it varies by antenna. It's a great opportunity to go out in your front yard with your antenna analyzer and play around with different combinations to figure out what works best. But remember, when you go someplace else, different ground conditions, soil conductivity, moisture, things like that. So you're not going to be able to throw the antenna up that you had at home and tune perfectly and expect it to operate the same way someplace else. Got to build in a little time for fine tuning. All right, again, one-to-one choke at the feed point helps minimize incidental radiation back into the radio, which can, if you're working sideband, can show up as distortion on your transmit signal. On modes like FT8, it can mean that it's corrupting your signal, and people are seeing your signal, but they're not decoding what you're sending. So something to keep in mind. Excuse me 1 second. Still got a little bit of morning voice here. Okay, horizontal wires, dipoles, end feds, inverted Ls, inverted Vs. These are your highest performing antennas. Generally, as a rule of thumb, the more wire you can get up in the air, the better the antenna is going to work. If you're a QRP operator, especially if you're running 10-watt single sideband, that can be a real challenge. So you want to have every advantage. So if you've got the situation that allows you to put up a bigger antenna, it's going to pay off for you. The extra effort will increase the likelihood that you're going to have a good, successful activation. End-fed random wires like this Pactena here. This is a 9-to-1 random wire. This requires an antenna tuner, so as versus a tuned end-fed dipole, or excuse me, a tuned end-fed half wave, like for 40 or 20. On the fundamental band, you can tune them so you do not require an antenna tuner. Antenna analyzer, that's an essential piece of equipment. Not to endorse any particular brand, but this Reg Expert stick is and they make several varieties of this. It's a really, really nice antenna analyzer. It's rugged. I charge this every couple of months. It's really stingy on battery use. It's just a really good go-to design. Of course, if you have a nano VNA sitting in your shack, you can always use that. But the nano VNA is not really optimized for field use. It's a little less rugged, but it's also a little less expensive than the Rig Expert. Okay, dipoles, 1-to-1 choke at the feed point, again to minimize incidental feed line radiation. But for end feds, move that choke to the radio, because now you can use the braid of the coax as the counterpoise for your end fed wire. Okay, tuned end feds like a 40-meter end fed, for example. Let's say you want to cut it for the middle of the 40-meter band, so 71, 75. Yes, that antenna is going to radiate on a second harmonic. However, as you go up in frequency, that second harmonic is going to move. With the 40-meter cut for the middle of the band, at 20 meters, you're at the very edge of the 20-meter phone band. By the time you go up to 15 and 10 meters, you're well outside the amateur radio band. So, and that harmonic relationship would be, at 14,350, you're also getting a low SWR. And then as you move up in the harmonic relationships, the SWR stays low. However, that low SWR point has moved out of the handband. So one way to get around that, obviously, is using an antenna tuner. Another way is with traps. So you can build an end-fed half wave with a trap for 20 meters and a trap for 15 meters. And what the traps will do is push that resonant point back down into the handband. You're going to lose a little bit of efficiency with the trap, but it's minuscule compared to how well how much better the antenna is going to perform. Also, you can take like a 40-meter end fed. Now, if you want to have the option of doing a nighttime activation and running 80 meters, you can put on a 40-meter end fed half wave, you can put a 110 microhenry loading coil at the end of the 40-meter segment, and then put about another 12, 13 feet of wire after that, and your 40-meter end fed will now load up on 80 meters. It will not perform as well as an 80-meter full-size dipole, but it'll still perform pretty well, and it's a good compromise between the amount of wire in the air, the engineering difficulties of how you're going to support it, versus something that's compact, or a little more compact, a little easier to deploy. Alrighty. And just the last point here. Most radios with internal tuners, they will typically do a 3-to-1, up to a 3-to-1 SWR without any difficulty. So generally, on something like a 40-meter end-fed half wave where you're working the harmonic bands, 20 and 15, the internal tuner on the radios are usually good enough to bring that SWR point back down into the band. Okay, then other antennas, what I like to call the boutique antennas. Elecraft AX1, AX2, MFJ 1899T, ATX Walkabout. All these antennas are really tiny. The AX1 on the side of the radio, if you look in the picture there, it's on my KX1. That antenna is about 6 feet tall, and I've got about a 25-foot counterpoise thrown out, and the Elecraft antenna is engineered to work within the capabilities of an Elecraft antenna tuner, which are a little more wide range than other built-in antenna tuners on radios. They can work. You can make this particular activation. I was in Texas, in Wichita Falls, and I made half a dozen contacts all up and down the Midwest. So it's possible, and that radio in that configuration is running about 3 watts on CW. So it's possible, but you're going to work for it. I consider this antenna is used for, I've got no other options, or hey, I've got an impromptu opportunity to do an unplanned activation, and it just sits in my backpack, and it's the easiest, quickest thing to deploy, but no guarantees that I'm going to have a successful activation. The counterpoise adds some directivity to it, so counterpoise placement is going to impact how the antenna operates. It works out better for the activator. It's less so for the hunter because the signals are down considerably. Generally, I found that there seems to be about a 10 dB makeup in the desire of the hunter to hunt you. So if the hunters are really interested, especially if you're activating a rare park or a twofer park, you got a lot of activators that are really motivated to make the contact. So they'll turn their ears up that extra 10 dB to work you. And then what I like to say, that this type of antenna, these really small boutique almost novelty antennas, they're dancing bear antennas, and it's not how well the bear dances, it's the fact the bear dances at all. Okay, so that's, I know I kind of breezed through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, and I also wanted to make sure I didn't run over time, because I don't want the hook. So, any questions? Go ahead. No, I personally have not had any bad, well, the majority of, I try to avoid interactions with the park rangers, so I tend to pick times of day where they're generally not around, early morning or late evening if I'm going to a state park. I tend to favor wildlife management areas and state forests simply because the only interaction I've ever had in a state forest was actually not a park ranger, but New Jersey Environmental Police. And the guy came out and he was just, he was curious as to what I was doing and just making sure I wasn't hunting without a license. So, and that was a 5-minute interaction. He didn't really care about, radio or anything like that, just so I wasn't breaking the law. So. That was a pretty benign interaction, but I've had conversations with other POTA activators where they have had negative interactions with park rangers. Generally, my friend Todd, W2TEF, did an activation at Fort Mott, which is a really neat park in Salem County, and the rangers came up and sought him out. And were actually very enthused about the operation. They told him, hey, invite more of your amateur radio buddies. We love it when you come down and put the park on the air. It makes, gets the park advertised, gets more people out there. So I'm working on for lack of a better term, a clinic operation where I'm going to go out with some folks that haven't done any park activations at all. And we're going to go out to Fort Mott because it's got a big, wide, grassy area right by the Delaware River. And I just got to go make arrangements with the park rangers to nail down a date. But we're going to go out there with a few people that have never done it before. And I can be there and give some coaching. So Any other questions? Okay. If you're curious about any of the gear I use for Parks on the Air activation, I got some up here. So, we'll happy to come up and do a little show and tell. All right. Thanks for your attention. I appreciate it.